Thanks everybody for coming to our event today, sponsored by the Qatar Foundation. We have three excellent guests here with us today. Maha Houssami is the interim Arabic program director at Duke University and a lecturer in Duke's Asian and Middle Eastern Studies Department. She launched multiple initiatives on campus and in the larger Triangle area in an effort to increase community engagement in Duke's academic language programs and to allow Duke students studying Arabic to practice what they are learning in real life situations. Houssami's career has been focused on collaborative language instruction, interactive educational technology, innovative leadership, and cross-cultural community engagement. She joins us today, along with two of her students, Chris Hassel and Cate Schick, to introduce a collaborative online anthology of Arabic modules that they call Anamel. Chris, who will be our second presenter, Chris Hassel, is a senior at Duke studying Arabic, anthropology, and economics. He assisted Maha Houssami with the Scene Gym project, a series of instructional videos entirely in MSA targeted at third-year Arabic students. He also serves as a grader for the third and fourth year Arabic programs at Duke and helped expand the content of the FLM website for dialect education through Arabic language films. Chris was responsible for compiling resources and developing lessons for the Anamel modules. Cate is a senior at Duke who is majoring in an interdisciplinary study in neuroscience and computer science and minoring in Arabic and Russian languages. Shouty, can you just, there's people coming into the waiting room. Can you just go ahead and admit them? Thanks. She joined the Anamel team to implement the WordPress site and optimize its functionality and is interested in pursuing software engineering as a career. This summer, she had an internship as a software engineer at an e-scooter company in New York City. Through this, she was able to improve her technical skills further. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us, especially on a Saturday, so much. And also as a note to everyone participating, our next event will be on September 13th with Maria Shakir of Valdosta State University in Georgia. And she will be talking to us about using food for teaching Arabic. So please, Maha, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Shana, for having us today. And hello, everyone. And thank you for joining us on a Saturday. I know we're all waiting for the weekend to relax, but we're very excited that you will be learning about Anamel and hopefully benefiting from Anamel. I am very happy to be here today and to be joined by Cate and Chris, who have put so much work into making Anamel become a reality. So Anamel is a collaborative online anthology of Arabic modules that we worked on in the past year. And it has become now public. And so Anamel is now available for the public to use and to benefit from. I'm not sure. Okay. So I would like to start my presentation or my part of the presentation today by asking everyone some questions that they can reflect on. We don't necessarily expect you to answer, but we don't mind if you would like to share your answers in the chat. And these questions are supposed to help guide our presentation, but they will also give you a better understanding of the things that we will answer as we move forward in our presentation. The first question, which might be obvious to some of you, but not to everyone, is the choice of the name of a site that's going to be used by the general public and specifically the Arabic as a foreign language community. The different projects that I've worked on as part of my Arabic as a foreign language instructor or like career, I've always chosen names that can be easy for both Arab speakers and American speakers learning Arabic. But I've also chosen names that kind of line up together. So Injaz, Aflam, Anamel, they all start with A, but that's not the only thing. It's that they are easy to remember and they kind of reflect what the whole project is about. So why do you think we chose the word Anamel? For those of us who know the meaning of Anamel in Arabic, fingertips, might be an obvious, we wanted to start with an easy question. The second question that I would like for our audience today to think about is, what do you think are the challenges that we face as instructors in involving our students in the decision-making? For those of us who are fans of John Dewey, I'm a big fan of John Dewey, who's a big name in the field of modern progressive education. Involving students in decision-making has many benefits, one of which is improving students' critical thinking skills, their sense of citizenship and belonging, but also the sense of community in the classroom. And so we face challenges when we want to involve our students, and when we make them part of the process of selecting what is studied, narrowing down some choices, and reflecting on how informed our decisions have been or how good our decisions have been. And so it's a time-consuming process. We all know that this is true. But are there other reasons why we hesitate sometimes to involve the students in this part of the educational process? And so that's another question to reflect on, and that we will try to answer in our presentation. The next question is, do we give enough credit to our students' achievements and projects, specifically in the field of language education? And what prevents us from using electronic platforms or using more of those platforms out there to showcase our students' work and projects? All right, so the last set of questions that we would like you to think about is, to what extent do we as lecturers, instructors, teachers, to what extent do we stick to the syllabus or the the material that, or the book even, that we need to teach, or the objectives that we need to achieve through a book or a set of resources, at the expense of students' interest? And finally, do our students' final project reflect their ability to use language creatively? So these are the 6 questions that we will, Cate, Chris, and I, kind of answer as we move forward in our presentation. All right, so let me start with how the Arabic program at Duke, or what the Arabic program at Duke looks like, and what combination of things students benefit from, and how this makes the choice of the kind of reformatting of 408, Arabic 408, where Anamel is used. Why did we decide to re-envision 408 basically? So Arabic 408 is it's the 6th course, the highest level of Arabic proficiency at Duke. And students usually go through a series of introductory, intermediate, advanced courses in Arabic until they get to Arabic 408 in their sometimes senior year, but at times also in their junior year. Some of the students who join this class have studied abroad. Some others have not studied abroad. Some are heritage speakers. Some are joining us from UNC Chapel Hill temporarily. And we are enjoying this mix in 408 because we are benefiting from different backgrounds and different sets of skills that students bring. This, having this nice mix of students, this mix also brings challenges. And the challenges are that students sometimes come in with gaps that they've accumulated over the years. And at other times, they come in with different interests that are very hard to have in one class. And so the idea of addressing students' interests in one class at such a high level of proficiency made the choice of, or like the process and the decision of having Anamel come to reality kind of a must. So Arabic 408, again, the 6th level in a series of Arabic courses at Duke, aims at helping students, regardless of whether they're heritage or non-heritage, and whether they've studied abroad or not, kind of reach the objectives that this level has is set for this level. And so Arabic 408 also addresses or tries to achieve objectives that are not just linguistic, but also cultural objectives. And this is what makes the task of addressing students' interests, but also achieving this advanced level class objectives more complex. So what are the opportunities and the challenges that we have been facing in the past 2 years specifically, and that have encouraged me, despite the difficulty of reshaping a whole class syllabus, what's encouraged me to benefit from the time we're going through, the transition that we're going through at the level of education, but also at the level of the world, is that the reality in the Arab world has been changing very rapidly. And students' interests, students who are studying Arabic, their interests have also been shifting. The second thing that you see on the slide, which is the modern standard Arabic and the dialects, is an opportunity, but also a challenge. And this has existed since the beginning of the Arabic language, basically. And so this is not a new challenge, but this is something that we had to take into consideration as we are transitioning from what Arabic 408 looked like before Anamel to what Arabic 408 looks like now. So as I was rethinking Arabic 408, I wasn't just thinking about the content. I was also thinking about a different way or methodology to deliver or to achieve the objectives of this level. And so I figured that actually project or problem-based methodologies would be ideal for such a class, especially that I have already used project-based methodologies in the past before Anamel became usable and was launched to the public. So what inspired Anamel is that for the past 2 years, I have moved away from a textbook and into an online platform that some of you are familiar with, which is called Khalina, spearheaded by Leila Familiar, very dear colleague. And Khalina has a team of colleagues who have contributed to the multiple levels of Arabic proficiency, the modules that are at the introductory to advanced levels of proficiency. And what attracted me to Khalina is that the themes and the topics covered were of interest to our students. And the way the modules were organized were interesting in the sense that we were able to pick and choose from the different steps in each module what we would like to cover. Another thing that attracted me to Khalina is that students were asked by the end of every module to perform something that was of meaning to them. So for example, at the end of the Sha'r al-Hur module, students wrote a poem about a topic that is of importance to them. And same applies to the previous modules where students, for example, in the أزمة القراءة في العالم العربي, also designed a marketing plan for a bookstore in the Arab world. And the same applies to the different modules that we have covered in the previous 2 years in 408. And so students' projects, while we were using Khalina, were closer to what students wanted their final projects to look like after 4 years of studying Arabic, but they weren't there 100%. There was something that we needed to do to make those projects more more personalized and more individualized. And this is where I'm gonna pass on the screen to Chris, who's gonna tell you more about this shift that happened from being inspired by Khalina and using Khalina and the themes on there to our homemade version of Khalina, which is the Anamel site. Chris, تفضل.
So great. Yeah, firstly, thank you everyone for being here, as was already said, and also thank you to Ustada Maha for her initiative behind this project, and her close guidance throughout the development of the content. And yes, so my name is Chris Hassel. I helped gather material and create some of the content for the sample modules, which I'll talk about in a minute. So I'm going to talk about the process of creating that content and then highlight some aspects of the content itself, and in a way that I hope is helpful for instructors who are attending today. So we created on this website a series of educational modules, much like the ones that are present on the Khalina website, with the goal of, with several goals in mind, basically. So in addition to the kind of general pedagogical goals that Maha mentioned before, we knew that we wanted each lesson within each module to center on authentic media texts, videos, and podcasts. We wanted them to be contemporary and internet-based. We wanted to include different types of media. So we're looking outside of the highly mainstream sites like Al Jazeera, even though Al Jazeera is obviously a really good resource. We want to expose students to a richness of what's out there on the internet in Arabic through these modules. And part of that, looking for that richness or diversity of sources, was also looking for a combination of news videos and YouTube videos from content creators or podcasts, and also news articles, but also opinion style pieces. So looking for different genres as well. In addition, we wanted to create content from different registers of Arabic. So most students in the Duke and UNC programs have strong backgrounds in Fusha, and many, but not all, have exposure to at least one Arabic dialect by the time they reach the 400 level, which is the 4th year of Arabic. And all of them, I would say, are interested to learn more about dialects and a bit of different dialects to be able to understand them better. And of course, because we were focusing on this idea of project-based learning, or how can we get students more involved in kind of driving their own curriculum, we wanted these 2 modules that we created for the website to serve as bases or models for students' final projects. And the final project in this class is something that Cate will talk more about, but the basic idea is that the final project occupies a good portion of the end of the semester. So after moving through the sample modules, students use those as sort of a basis of what is it that I'm trying to produce in my final project. They produce their own modules, and those modules are also uploaded to the website alongside the sample modules. So first of all, what do I mean exactly by a module? Well, much like the ones in Khalina, they are composed, each one, of a group of lessons that are all within each module related to a shared topic. So the topics that we ended up settling on are migration, food, cultural exchange, and livelihoods. That's one theme. And then the other theme was music in Arab societies. And so, and of course, we considered multiple other ideas for topics. I think at some point we talked about having one module focusing on food, globalization, and multiculturalism. And we had an idea for one that centered around gender and feminism in the Arab countries, one that perhaps touched on the Palestinian case. And at the same, so we had these kind of lofty or broad ideas about what topics to choose, but at the same time, we were considering all of these pedagogical goals that we've discussed, and at the same time, looking for authentic resources to support those pedagogical goals. So in the end, as you'll see, we have a little intersection here in the image on this slide. We focused on finding the kind of happy medium or the intersection between our pedagogical goals and at the same time, things that will be interesting to students, and perhaps most, or also equally importantly, what resources were available to us, high quality resources in the Arabic language from a wide variety of sources. And then each module, each of the two modules, migration, food, cultural exchange, and livelihoods, and then music in Arab societies. Each of those is divided into 4 days worth of classwork and homework. So the idea there being that these are, it's clearly applicable to a classroom setting where there's I guess a clear curriculum to follow for each one, with exercises and activities both for home and in the classroom. Yes, thank you. Yeah, so like I said, we were, in our own process, we were looking for that kind of happy intersection between different types of goals that we had, whether they were pedagogical or in terms of what types of resources we wanted students to be exposed to. Then, because, or rather one thing that we learned from the process of doing this is that a level of flexibility is an important requirement for developing curriculum around a class that you're teaching. So we want to emphasize that the concept behind the creation of Anamel, which was to use these authentic resources as the basis of classroom materials, is a flexible one, and it just requires that one combine pedagogical goals, the interests of students, and resources that are accessible, whether that be on the internet or another resource that you have available. So I think often instructors probably know, either have a sense of the interests of their students or have the ability to, I guess, ask students and get a sense of the interests. And so this is a happy middle ground that in your own, I guess, quest to use authentic resources in the classroom, questions that could be asked in any situation. Here's where I will share my screen. Okay. And please let me know if there are any problems on your end. But yeah, so this is the homepage of Anamel, the website. And I think at this point, to sort of illustrate the way that the process worked and the way that the content ended up, it would be helpful to look at some examples. So we're on the homepage here, and you can see that there are these 3 helpful links to some self-study materials, the actual modules, and then, the course schedule. We're going to go up to the toolbar where there's a similar set of things, and we're going to actually start with one example from module 2, music and Arab societies. As you can see, there's a short introduction to each sample module, and then as we scroll down, we can see the content divided into 4 days worth of homework and classwork. And so we're going to start with module 2, day 1. And from here, this is like the main page of the day of content, you can easily see what the student is assigned to do for homework. And we're going to start by looking at this documentary briefly. And the idea here is to give an idea of why exactly we chose the resources that we chose. So after all my talk about looking for sources outside of the mainstream and things that are about contemporary issues, here's an Al Jazeera documentary about Kulthum, which I think would be considered, quite mainstream and also kind of a classic figure to talk about in an Arabic classroom. The cool thing about this documentary is that it talks about Kulthum and her relationship to the Egyptian state and to Arab nationalism in the mid 20th century. And so that's an interesting, different perspective that some students may not be aware of. So that was a kind of a reason that we thought this was a valuable piece. At the same time, the language is a mix of Fusha and Egyptian Ammiya, so that is a good opportunity as well. The other great thing about this type of piece, this is a 50-minute television documentary, and it's an empowering thing for a student to kind of watch at least a portion of this video and realize that they have the ability to understand it, even if not every word. And this was another thing that we confronted as we were looking for authentic resources, and the fact that they're authentic, of course, means that they're not designed to be class assignments, but a 50-minute video for a language course is a difficult thing for students to handle for one day worth of homework. So when we came across that kind of problem, we would require students just, for instance, for this video, just to watch the first 12 minutes of or 18 minutes of the documentary, to get some of the main ideas and from the documentary. And then below each resource, whether it's a video, podcast, or an article, there are always a set of questions on the Anamel modules. And those questions are, of course, it can be used to assess the student's understanding of a piece if they're asked to turn in questions in writing, for instance. But because there are many questions, they also help to guide a student's understanding of a piece. And if they're wondering, what exactly am I supposed to be getting out of this, the questions can help them figure out what to focus on as they watch or read. And then yes, and so these, I guess the combination of the questions with a longer video can serve that purpose to make it more manageable by providing almost like a blueprint of what is there. And then as part of the same day of content, there are these two resources that have to do with al-maqamat. So again, talking about something that is not necessarily contemporary, although of course the maqamat play a role in some contemporary music. And so it's not, many of the resources deal with contemporary issues, but not all. So students are asked only to read a short piece of this article for homework, because again, they're watching this long documentary. And then as part of the, sorry about that, as part of the day one classroom assignment, they're asked to do a group activity involving this. And so this is kind of more of the classroom side of the Anamel pieces. So you can see that after reading part of this article, which is about the maqamat, they go down to this chart, and as a group, they fill out some information about the maqamat that's based on the article. So that's just another way of turning an authentic resource into an interactive activity that's also in kind of a manageable format, like just picking out little snippets of information. And So on the flip side of the sort of canonical, speaking about Kulthum and using Al Jazeera as a resource, day 4 of this module talks about much more contemporary issues. And as you can see here, under the homework section, students are assigned to watch an interview with Mashru' Leila, which is a well-known Lebanese band that talks about a lot of political and social issues. And they're also asked to read an article about the broader Arabic alternative music scene. And so this is just to address the idea that not all Arabic music is directly from the tradition of Kulthum, even though it's important to also for students to also get a perspective on Kulthum from that earlier exercise. And so these bring in different types of resources and talk about a topic from different angles that also can spark a good discussion between students, even if they're not, don't have a background with music. They can get in on a discussion where the documentary about Kulthum is very focused on her relationship to politics. So that sparks a discussion about the relationship between music and politics, and in this case also the relationship between music and social movements. And so that is a good way in a classroom with diverse interests to make sure that there's something that every student can relate to and talk about, while also, we're going to teach them some of the important vocabulary and concepts around, Arabic music and the maqamat. But then you're also going to be able to have this rich discussion in class, especially among advanced students, if there's a connection there to some broader social or political topics. And finally, within the module, the music module, I want to briefly point out another piece that is about this lesson is focused on a podcast episode. So of course, this is bringing in another form of media. That was an important goal for us to show the kind of breadth of types of resources that are out there and get students to be kind of curious about, like, oh, if there's a podcast, in this case, Dumtek is a podcast that talks about music in Arab majority countries, and always from a different angle each season. So they had one that was focused on women in the Arabic music history. And then they had one that was about ethnic minorities in Arabic music history. So this episode is from that season. And it's about how Ma'tub al-Wannas, I think is the name of the musical activist that it talks about, and his role in the what is sometimes called the Berber Spring or the Amazigh Spring in Algeria. And so again, there's a connection to social movements. It is about music, and it's also about things that a broad audience can have a vibrant discussion about. Yes. And actually, I want to point out, this is an example of how the resources really informed our decisions about what the topics of the modules will be and how that can work, because since Maha and I were already aware of Minassat Sot, which is this the podcast platform that posts a lot of, or rather produces a lot of podcasts in Arabic and in Arabic dialects, we knew that this was something that we wanted to include. And then knowing that Dumtek had an entire season about ethnic minority figures in Arab majority countries and their role in music, it seemed like an excellent opportunity to try to loop music and social issues together into one unit. And that really helped us define, based on what was out there and kind of combining what was out there, our pedagogical goals and what we thought interests of students would be, and what will produce a vibrant discussion, or like get students personally involved in the class. That helped us define this, the topic of this module really well. there are a couple of things I want to highlight from module 1 as well. This one being the module that's about migration, food, cultural exchange, and livelihoods. I personally really wanted to do a module. When I was brainstorming topics for these modules, I wanted to do one that had to do with food. I like to cook, and I spent time in Jordan and really enjoyed the food there. And I thought that it was kind of, again, something that a lot of students might be able to have an interest in, whether or not they've traveled to Arab majority country, is something that brings people together, always food. But at the same time, we were really interested in kind of spotlighting experiences that are of people or groups that are sometimes marginalized in society with these things. And so not only did we try to loop in social and political topics into the music module, but we found that there was also this interesting thread on the side of food, where members of the Arab diaspora in many regions of the world, I guess, have established restaurants or initiatives that involve presenting what are thought of as like Arab foods to non-Arab audiences, and also to Arab audiences who are also members of the Arab diaspora. And so this was another way that kind of a knowledge of what was out there, in addition to a knowledge of what produces important discussions, and also ideas that we wanted students to, I guess, leave the course with, informed the formation of the topic, which ended up being migration, food, cultural exchange, and livelihoods. So I just want to spotlight one or two things here. This was a great opportunity we also found to incorporate yet another type of resource. And in this case, it was from a video from a travel vlogger named Ibn Hattuta. That's his his vlogger name. And so here he was in Portugal, and he discovered this restaurant run by two Syrian refugees that was working at the beginning of the COVID pandemic to serve frontline healthcare workers food. And so I took that opportunity to create this video, and yeah, by including a video from a travel vlogger, I think that also exposes advanced students to perhaps like the world of or the fact that the world of like content creation and influencers, which a lot of people my age are obviously very aware of and very active on, that they can use find things that are related to their own interests in the Arabic language, and that is another way of I guess involving the students' interests in pedagogy. So I guess just for a sense of the flavor of this video and kind of comparing that to a documentary or a news show, I'm going to play just maybe 45 seconds of this video.
Chris, you can try turning off your personal camera and it'll redirect more of the bandwidth to your screen.
Okay.
If you, that might help.
Yeah, okay. I'll try that.
أنا علاء. وأنا رامية، نحن لاجئين سوريين وعم نحاول نقدم صورة إيجابية عن اللاجئين في أوروبا. للأسف بالعادة صورة اللاجئ بتكون مرسومة بطريقة سلبية في ذهون الشعوب.
لكن قبل ما أطلع من البرتغال تعرفت على شخصين عم برسموا صورة مغايرة للاجئ السوري في أوروبا. علاء وراميا مثل غيرهم من اللاجئين بدأوا حياتهم من الصفر في أوروبا بدون موارد ولا شبكة علاقات. أول ما وصلنا على البرتغال كنا مثل أي لاجئ بأي بلد أوروبي، بلد جديد، ثقافة جديدة، لغة جديدة. الناس للأسف تتوقع من اللاجئ يكون عالي على المجتمع، لكن هم قرروا إنه يشتغلوا قدر المستطاع لكسر هذه الصورة النمطية.
I hope people were able to hear that. It's hard for me to tell. Okay. So yes, you get the sense that I guess this kind of touches on not only on food, it goes on to talk about like the dishes they're preparing, but also on kind of societal issue that is really important and important for in the contemporary time for students to talk about. Also raises an interesting question that we were constantly dealing with as we developed content for the site, which is how do we deal with different dialects, because we wanted to have like a richness and a breadth of dialects and registers on the site. But at the same time, students come in with really different backgrounds, especially by the 400 level. You know, people have had 3 years of experience perhaps outside the classroom, or maybe they've mostly been focusing on their classroom work, which is mainly Fusha. So, and because we drew from all kinds of dialects in the resources that we used, which is a source of richness, it's also a source of complication, because there's no way that we could really instruct in I think the 6 or 7 different dialects that the videos videos and podcasts we use came from. So the way we approached that was to provide what we found to be helpful tips about how can a student who has a strong foundation in Fusha understand this video, just with a few kind of notes about like how does pronunciation change between Fusha and this particular dialect. So there are pronunciation tips. There are a few very basic vocabulary notes, and occasionally something about the grammatical structures in the dialect, and all of those things in a very direct way. We tried to, and we always tried to have that very closely related to the content of the video itself. So to make it a very applied exercise, and to really focus on that resource, getting the student able to understand what's going on and come to class able to discuss it. Yes, and so we had a similar approach, I would say, to vocabulary as a whole. I don't know if there's vocabulary words here. No, there's no vocabulary. But so for the resources that were in Fusha especially, we would provide a list of vocabulary words, but we ended up cutting, ended up cutting the length of the vocabulary list and really focusing on what it is that the student needs in order to understand. And now, just very quickly, I want to highlight one other aspect, which is that we had 2 interviews with someone who is a Syrian refugee and has also written a very popular cookbook that was published in the German language. So when we were also talking about how to deal with the ammiyat in our resources, we decided that in this case, it made sense to have one interview that was very heavily ammiyat, like almost everything was in Syrian dialect, even the interviewer, the interviewee. And then in the same module, and actually on the same day, they watch a different video that interviews the same person, but the interviewer in this case is speaking completely in Fusha, and there's a lot of narration in Fusha. So that it allowed us to have a little bit more flexibility. Again, having a group of students that come from really different backgrounds in terms of what types of dialects they're capable of working with and what they're comfortable with. So in general, oh, and I also, I guess, should bring up the discussion questions here, that because these deal with issues that are, of course, like each resource, or each day at least, comes with a set of discussion questions in the classwork section, and those class discussion questions are, of course, meant to get students talking about those social issues, and I guess bringing up the things that are likely to get students talking, based again on students' interests, and what they're able to talk about after having learned the relevant vocabulary and watched the resource or read the article. So the overarching idea with all these things was that the resources hit a few of the pedagogical goals, different registers and dialects, focus on contemporary, although we didn't shy away from, addressing important figures from history like Kulthum and Ma'tub al-Nas in a different light. We brought in like a diverse mix of resources, from news to culture blogs to travel blogger videos to podcasts, just trying to show the breadth of what's out there in 2021 to students who are and importantly, that showing that breadth then empowers students in their own final project to use the breadth of resources and go very deep with their own topic when they choose a topic to create their own project related to. By the end of using all these different resources, they also know that even if they are not very, very comfortable with a particular dialect, that they're able to get through a resource that uses that dialect, and that opens new doors for them when they're creating their own project. And just aware of the breadth of possibilities, and how a final project that's cohesive but also potentially quite broad can look. And I'm going to pass the mic to Cate at this point. This project would not have been possible at all without her. She did an amazing job working on the design for this site. And she's going to talk about that.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen real quickly. There we go. So once again, I just want to express my gratitude, the Anamel team's gratitude, that you guys would not only take time out of your busy Saturday to spend some time with us, but also that you're interested in something that we've spent a lot of time and a lot of creativity and a lot of effort on. So thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to share a little bit more about the technical implementation of Anamel. The first thing we're going to do is actually divide you guys up into 3 breakout rooms. For this reason, you guys can look at the actual site itself, specifically focusing on that module tab section. Right here. And the reason for that is I want to show the difference between the sample modules designed by Maha and Chris, modules 1 and 2, with the student submitted modules 3, 4, and 5. And each of the 3 breakout rooms should focus on either module 3, module 4, or module 5. And just spend a couple minutes doing that. And after, when we come back together, I want to explain why there is a difference in design between the sample modules and the student submitted modules. So I believe the links are in the chat. Please feel free to break yourselves up into those breakout rooms and explore for a few minutes. And I'm sure you may have questions about stylistically some design choices, some structural choices. And before I actually discuss some of the technical aspects of Anamel and how I went about designing, optimizing, and implementing the website itself, I did want to touch upon one of the most critical facets of Anamel, the student submitted modules. Currently on Anamel, we have 5 active modules as well as 5 archived modules, which I will discuss later in the section. 2 of these modules, the first one, food and culture, as well as the second one, music, were sample modules designed by Chris and Maha, and have a different design feel than modules 3, 4, and 5. In modules 1 and 2, each module is broken up into 4 days, and every resource on each day is given its own page in order to break up the content and simplify what we are learning on what day, what is required to be prepared for class on what day, and basically just to break up the content well. I did that to optimize our site layout and make things as clear as possible. In a later slide indicating some challenges of this implementation process, I'm going to discuss some of the functionality changes that Anamel's seen over the months that we've been working on it, and optimizations we've made during this design process. But for now, I do want to focus on modules 3, 4, and 5. And for a final project in the spring 2021 semester, we had students in Arabic 408 at Duke given the task of designing their own lesson modules based on the sample ones. The topic was left up to them, as was the design and implementation of their own project. What resulted from this creative freedom was 3 modules, each equally unique, that highlighted each student's individual strength and design skills. And while the basic layout of their modules matched the ones we had used as samples, it did not feel right for me personally to reformat these presentations in order to fit the existing aesthetic of modules 1 and 2. I saw these presentations, these submissions to me as these students' intellectual property, and I wanted to treat them with the care and respect that I would as if they were these students' material possessions. For this reason, I actually decided to directly embed these presentations submitted to me into Anamel. Every module has an introduction page and some module objectives listed in them, but the student modules are preserved exactly as they were sent to me by the students. Myself, Chris, and Maha, the Anamel team as a whole, believes that this was a great way for students to see their hard work and their efforts in a tangible way. Being able to showcase something that they've created not only as a final project, but displayed on a website for users to see, learn more about, and interact with. It allows a student to leave an impact that goes beyond what they learned in Arabic 408. And as they leave Duke and as they go forward in their lives, there still will be a lasting impact. A similar logic applies to the modules that I've placed in the archive. The archive modules were actually existing modules from when I started taking over the design of this website. I revamped the theme, the structure, and a lot of creative design changes in this website, but it still felt like a disservice to simply delete the already existing contributions that other students had made. By switching these design and functionality, we did lose some of that aesthetic on those existing modules, but the content was still there. I still wanted others to have access to the information if they wished, so I added the archive section, which preserved this intellectual property, but it still separated it from the modules that will be submitted moving forward and what will be created as a part of Anamel versus the existing Arabic 408 website. So now I would like to switch to a more technical conversation about our website. First, I'm just gonna keep sharing my screen as I briefly explain each tab in our website and take you through a sample module. I think Chris already did a great job at showing you the content of this site, but what I'm gonna show you is more of some design choices and why we built it the way that we did. So the great thing about having students on your team is that you can almost consider the student perspective in the design of your website. And these 3 homepage links I thought were some of the 3 most important things people are going to be coming to our website for. The first group would be students in Arabic 408 that would like to know what's going on in their class. The second would be people interested in our modules, wanting to learn more about Arabic culture or a specific topic that interested them. And this third category is for people interested in improving their language skills and maybe having some more access to cultural resources. We have a top navigation bar up here, just so right away students can pick a group or a page that they want to go to. We have some information about Arabic 408, some of these modules we've designed, self-study and more resources, which I'm going to cover at the end of my portion of this presentation. In terms of the design of each module, we actually were directed to Helena, which Maha has covered, in a previous portion of this presentation. I wanted to include some of these aspects of Helena in Anamel, but I also wanted to create something new. I didn't want to just replicate what Helena was and almost create Helena 2.0. Some of these design aspects of Helena that I really liked was an introduction page, letting people know what this module is going to be about, as well as a navigation page where you can actually see what you're going to be doing for each module. No matter where you're on number 1 or number 5, you're able to see your progress through the module. Given the limitations of WordPress, and specifically the Elementor plugin that we use, I couldn't exactly replicate it, nor did I want to. So the way that we designed Anamel is that, once again, each module has its own introduction page where we give you some course objectives, as well as some information about what you're about to learn. And right at the top, students can see what their homework is going to be, because thinking from a student perspective, I believe that I would be clicking on these modules kind of wanting to understand what would be required of me to be prepared for class, an introduction into what you're going to learn that day, as well as your class resources. We wanted to have a landing page where you can see all of it at once. And within each day themselves, you can see, similar to Helena, where you are in the module as you progress through it. After several Anamel team meetings and a lot of functionality improvements and updates, we were able to create a site that I think is comprehensive, easy to follow, and creative, its own thing versus just a repeat of Helena. As I move forward in my presentation, I also think it's important to mention the set of challenges that we encountered when creating this website. This is for those interested in replicating our experience. I want to highlight some of the pitfalls that I fell into, so you can avoid these same problems. Perhaps the most important challenge to keep in mind when building a website is picking a font that works well with both Arabic and English and is also visually appealing. Because we were using a free version of an extension for WordPress, we were very limited in the set of fonts provided to us. And most of these fonts changed how the English text looked. It was more oriented towards English. So when I applied it to the Arabic portion of the website, it either didn't really do much or it completely altered the Arabic text. And after going back and forth between a few fonts in several of our meetings, we settled on using something called Paprika, because not only is it both visually appealing in Arabic and English, but it also just seemed more creative than using Times New Roman or a more general font. So I've listed Paprika, Avenir, Times New Roman, Arial, and Scope 1 as 5 fonts you may want to consider, because those 5 were the 5 that we had decided between, and all of them are compatible with English and Arabic, and they help with the visual layout of the site. For us, though, Paprika seemed to work. Additionally, as I covered the functionality of the websites, I do want to mention that Anamel went through many drafts in the initial design process, and a lot of my portion of this experience wasn't necessarily building the site itself. It was redesigning it, optimizing it, making sure that it was easy to navigate and easy to understand. It could take me 10 minutes to put the content on a page and 2 hours to move things around and make sure it was the best design possible. Some functionality improvements came with our inclusion of a lot of menu bars. Not only is there a navigation bar at the top of the site, we included navigation bars at the bottom of the site, as well as at the right-hand side. This way, users can quickly and more efficiently find the pages that you're looking for without having to scroll all the way up, all the way down to get to specific pages. Additionally, one of the major challenges of this site was just navigating through all the many pages present in sample modules. In one day of one module, we could have 8 resources for a student to prepare. And that comes with 8 pages, as well as a day page and a module introduction. And within the first couple weeks of designing Anamel, I noticed that it was hard for me designing the site to find my way back. So we included the use of back buttons on every page within to go back to the objective, or if you wanted to go back to the module's homepage, you could easily do that from whatever point you were in the module itself. This way, we are much less likely to confuse our users, and they're going to feel more confident and feel that the site is more accessible to them. And in the end of the day, that was the goal of Anamel, is to create a landing page that is accessible to people that are just interested in learning more about Arabic, whether through a class or a self-learner. And one last functionality point to mention is the lesson introduction pages. I wanted each module and each day within the module to have a landing page so that students or people interested can see exactly what's being covered without having to scroll through pages and pages of content. By placing homework right at the top and classwork at the bottom, students are less likely to miss what is being asked of them to prepare for class. And it's going to be more clear what they need to do to be prepared for a class discussion. And all of these design choices were made to make Anamel more intuitive and allow users to focus more on getting what they need out of the site rather than figuring out where the content is that they want to see. A last point to mention, and something to consider when designing anything, is intellectual property and copyright. I've familiarized myself with the fair use policy. However, there are many caveats and exceptions to what you can use for free in an educational setting. And I decided that it would be in the best interest of Anamel and myself simply to use open source images to avoid these legalities entirely. On this slide, I've listed some of the websites that I use to get some free images. My strongest recommendation would be Unsplash, just due to the sheer number of images on the site, as well as the variety. For the most part, I was able to find what I needed just using Unsplash. However, Pixabay, Pexels, and free images is also something that I would like to recommend. I'm actually going to head back a little bit to actually building a website. And this is another slide for people who like what we've done with Anamel and might want to either build something similar or build something different entirely. So in terms of designing a website, the Anamel team and you would be faced with two options. And I'm briefly going to discuss these two choices and explain why we went with WordPress over a custom website. One of our options was to use an online website builder. Sites like WordPress, Weebly, and Wix come with existing website structures where you don't have to worry about writing any code or any of those technical aspects of building a website. Themes, pages, and menu bars are handled in a well-designed dashboard to keep you organized, and site extensions, which are called plugins for WordPress, allow you to add very specific niche functionalities to your site. These builder options are great because you're able to focus on the site content and the core of what you want to get across to your users rather than servers, code, and any of those technical portions, which you may or may not be familiar with. However, a limitation that I think is important to mention is that you were limited to the structure and design options that these present to you. In certain situations, such as a paid version of a plugin that we used, you are able to import custom CSS code. And for my non-techies out there, CSS is basically a style language. You type what you want in HTML, which tells you what goes where, and you type in something called CSS to dress it up. And being able to import custom CSS code would allow that additional design functionality, which made designing Arabic and English fonts pretty difficult for us. If you'd rather not limit yourself to some pre-made options, and either you or somebody on your team have technical skills in HTML, CSS, and maybe even JavaScript, you can also consider designing a site from scratch. Combining HTML, CSS, and JavaScript can result in a great dynamic website where you could have all the structural design and interactive functionality you'd want, and you would only be limited by your time, your technical skills, and your imagination. Speaking of time though, building a custom site is incredibly time consuming. It will take the time to build a single page from scratch is roughly equivalent to the time it took me to build Anamel. Also, long-term maintaining of a site, it would be much more difficult to maintain a custom site than a WordPress site. Everybody codes differently, and if I built Anamel from scratch and I were to pass it on from somebody else, they may or may not be able to read my code very well. So if this is a long-term project in the way that Anamel is, it makes more sense to use a pre-existing website builder. Based on our time constraints, and the desire to get this site up and running, as well as the importance of long-term maintenance, the Anamel team decided to pursue the website builder option, specifically WordPress. And in terms of fast and easy web development, I cannot recommend WordPress enough. There's a lot of boilerplate code and structure that's already built in, a pre-existing server and basic page setup. All of this technical jargon is covered by WordPress itself. So it simplifies the actual implementation process and allowed me, the web designer, to better focus not just on building a website that works, but building a website that fit the vision that we were describing in our Anamel meetings. In this vision, I would like to close and talk about. So to close, I really want to emphasize a part of Anamel that I think is the most important thing to take away from our meeting today. Our idea of Anamel goes beyond academic Arabic courses at Duke and beyond. It goes beyond the classroom in general. We really want it to be a landing page for Arabic enthusiasts, solo learners, and anybody with an interest in diving deeper into different aspects of Arabic culture. For this reason, Anamel is equipped with self-study and more resources tabs, which I'm going to show you. First, let's start with the self-study page. On this self-study tab, we currently have links to Arabic news sources, documentaries, and language learning materials for those interested in brushing up on their Arabic reading, listening, and grammar skills. Within each of these sources, there are Arabic materials that can fit any level of proficiency, making the site more accessible to beginners, intermediate levels, and advanced levels. In the next few weeks, my hope is to add more to this page and find new categories. I'm currently compiling resources for mobile applications and games to enhance Arabic skills by downloading as many of them as I can and filtering through them to figure out which ones work the best for me. And actually on this slide, I do want to highlight this rainbow raindrop. It's actually my favorite iOS language learning application called Drops. It's incredibly helpful with vocabulary and pretty much only vocabulary. And it comes equipped with vocab from over 43 languages. I've had this app for years actually, and it's helped me in not only my Arabic studies, but my Russian studies. And now onto the more resources page. As educators, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the studies showing how resources like music and film can actually help students learn a language. Not only that, but it's a great way for people to dive deeper into a culture that you're seeking to learn more about. For this reason, I thought it was important to include some helpful links and resources to some important parts of Arabic culture like film, music, food. Also, if you have any suggestions for food blogs, music channels, or movie resources, I would love for you to leave a comment in the chat or even email me after this presentation, because this is a section of Anamel that will be fluid. And as we keep compiling these resources, we hope to add new categories and more resources to this section. So to close, this is my technical overview of Anamel. Ooh, sorry. One final point that I want to get across builds off that first question that Maha presented to you in our first slide. Why did we name this website Anamel versus anything else? I really want to drive home that our website name, Anamel, was chosen very intentionally, almost to remind people that your fingertips go beyond textbooks, papers, and the classroom. Your fingertips pursue hobbies, your fingertips engage in creative projects, art, music, and your fingertips shake the hand of the people around you. And really, this is what we wanted to accomplish, and this was the main goal of Anamel, is building a site that incorporates all of these aspects. That's my technical overview. Shukran.
Shukran. Do you mind keeping your presentation so I can wrap everything, keeping the...
Yes, sorry.
The next slide, if you don't mind. So thank you, Kate. Thank you, Chris. And thank you, everyone, for listening. I just want to conclude with the fact that introducing students to the shared Arabic learning community and the opportunities offered in the upper levels will inspire them to continue studying Arabic, enroll in higher level courses, and apply Arabic to topics of personal interest. In addition, students are given through Anamel the chance to contribute with work that they've compiled, but that they've also contributed by writing themselves some pieces to the general. It's a constructive effort in the hope of serving the global community of learners of Arabic and fans of the Arabic language. Kate, do you mind just moving to the next slide? And at the end of our presentation today, I owe a big thank you to the DC Arabic Teachers Council, Shana, Shawish, thank you, and to the Anamel team, Cate and Chris. And I would like to mention that Amulia is also an undergrad who had initially worked on the 408 WordPress site that has become the current Anamel. The Asian and Middle Eastern Studies Department at Duke that's been extremely supportive of our work, the Duke UNC consortium that has funded the work that Cate and Chris did, and the UNC's webmaster who's maintaining Anamel currently, and everyone who has attended today. Thank you.
Great. And I think now we want to open it up to see if anyone has any questions. I have a question. Thanks, Maha, Chris, and Cate. Is this something that you're going to continue to build out on the site so that perhaps if there was another classroom at another university or another advanced class at a high school, and the instructor wanted their students to put together similar modules, if you would be willing to host those modules on your site after like a thorough review, because I'm sure a lot of instructors don't have the capacity, right, to build out a site in the way you did.
Go ahead, Cate.
Sorry, I had to find the mute button. I actually thought about that when designing the website. And that's actually why I group my modules in different ways. We have them grouped by titles, we have them grouped by semesters. And if we reviewed a school's module selection and we thought that they would be a great addition to Anamel, I could very easily add a group by school option. And also provide another tab within like the course information specifically for this is the Duke class, this is whichever class. So yeah, I definitely think that could be an idea.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions that they want to get in before we dismiss? I see lots of people saying thank you in the comments, so everyone did great. And of course, you know, people are going to view this presentation online also. So if there are any questions and someone maybe doesn't make it to this last slide, we'll follow up with you guys so we can get answers to those questions.
I just have one question, and it was raised during our group breakout rooms. First, thank you so much for this. Like, this is a great effort, and yeah, it must have been really taking a lot of time. So with the module that we have navigated and discussed, I'm wondering, is this the module is designed to have it like presented to the students in like a 1-day module or like the 4 days module? How the content is in terms if we want to use it in our as a teaching material. Do we use it per day? Because the material in the module was our thought, if it's 1 day, it's a lot for the students, even in the advanced level. Like we pressed on the Google Sheets and we saw like long articles. So that's our question. How, it's intentionally or unintentionally is put to be taught.
Question, and I didn't touch on it clearly enough when I was presenting, but so there are typically at least one written article and then at least one kind of audio resource per day of class time as it's structured on the website. And then along with each of those, there are several questions that students can use as they're like reading or as they're listening. But the idea there is also that almost no instructor would assign students to, for instance, like write answers to every question that's on those pages. So there's definitely flexibility there. And I think even as we were designing it for a Duke class, the Duke 408, Arabic 408 class, it was intended that some of those questions would perhaps be there for students to think about, but then they would be assigned to maybe write down answers just to a couple of the questions. And right, so there's flexibility. And certainly the discussion questions for class often touch on all of the resources that are included in that day of content. So if there's like an article and 2 videos, then the discussion questions for in class might touch on all of those. But in other cases, the discussion questions are really just focused on one of the resources or just focused on a broad topic. So the instructor can choose which resources to assign or or how heavy they want the workload to be by kind of taking what's there, which is a lot, and then cutting it down to exactly what's helpful for the course that they're working on.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you for your question. I also want to add the fact that we've been working on more than one project to serve the Arabic as a foreign language community. And we've realized that a lot of learners out there want to use those resources and want to use resources that are free and flexible enough to be adapted to the different levels of proficiency. So some of the users aren't using them as part of a classroom, they're self-teaching themselves Arabic. And so we wanted the list of questions, suggested questions, to inspire the user, whether they're using it as part of a classroom or outside their classroom. And we do believe in extending or like breaking the walls of the classroom. So if you want to start a discussion in class and invite students to keep thinking about the rest of the questions at home, that's perfectly fine. But no one is expected necessarily to cover everything on there.
Thank you.
Does anyone have one final question to get in here before we dismiss everyone for their Saturday? No. Okay, well, thank you everyone so much. Thank you, Maha. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Cate. This is obviously an enormous amount of work, and hopefully you'll get some submissions of some new module material that can be incorporated into this, and it'll grow into an even larger project. Thank you so much. And for those of you who are members of the Arabic Teacher Council, we hope to see you back on September 13th for a presentation with Maria Shakir, and that information will go out in the email to all of the members shortly. Thanks so much, everyone.